The stallion screamed before Rosalind did. She stood at the edge of the stable yard, her wrists still raw from the carriage ride, and watched the great black horse rear against its handlers while her father counted coins into Lord Silas Crane's open palm. Nobody had told her this was how it would happen. Nobody had told her anything at all, except to wear her good gray dress and not to cry in front of the Duke. "You will not embarrass me," her father had said that morning, not meeting her eyes. "This is the only way to save us." Now she understood what saving them meant. It meant standing in a stranger's stable yard while men argued over a horse, and she waited to be handed over like a second animal in the trade. The Duke of Marchmont did not look at her either. He stood a little apart, arms folded, watching his prize stallion being led away by Crane's men with something close to grief on his face. He was younger than she expected, and colder. His jaw was set hard, his eyes the flat gray of a winter sky. When the papers were signed and the stallion's lead rope changed hands, only then did he turn to look at the woman he had just purchased with an animal he clearly loved more. "Rosalind Hartley," he said. It was not a greeting. It was a confirmation, the way a man might check a shipment against a list. "Your Grace." She kept her chin high. Whatever else was true, she would not let him see her shake. "Weston Kestrel," he said, "Duke of Marchmont. You will address me as such, or as husband, once the vows are said this afternoon." He glanced toward the departing stallion one final time, and something flickered across his face before it vanished. "I am told, you understand the terms." "I understand that my father owed Lord Crane a great deal of money, and that Lord Crane wanted your horse more than he wanted the debt repaid in coin," Rosalind said. "And I understand that you agreed to give up your horse in exchange for a wife you have never met. I confess I do not understand why." For the first time he looked at her properly. Something like respect, thin and reluctant, crossed his expression. "I did not agree to a wife," he said. "I agreed to an arrangement. There is a difference, and you would do well to remember it." He turned and walked toward the house without waiting to see if she followed. Rosalind stood a moment longer in the empty yard, listening to the fading sound of hooves on gravel, and thought of her sister, hidden away in the small cottage at the edge of their father's land, too fragile to make the journey to witness her own sister's wedding. Winnie did not know yet what price had been paid to keep her safe. Rosalind intended to make sure she never did. She followed the Duke into the house. The wedding was small and fast, conducted in the chapel on the estate grounds by a vicar who seemed eager to be elsewhere. Rosalind wore the gray dress. Weston wore black, as though attending a funeral rather than his own marriage. When he placed the ring on her finger, his hand was steady, and his eyes were somewhere far away. She wondered, briefly, what had made a duke so willing to trade his most treasured possession for a bride he did not want. She did not ask. She had her own secret to protect, and she suspected that a man with secrets of his own would be less inclined to pry into hers. That evening, the household staff prepared a quiet supper in the smaller dining room, away from the grand hall that Rosalind guessed was reserved for guests the Duke did not currently wish to entertain. She ate little. Across the table, Weston drank his wine and studied her the way a man studies a ledger he does not yet trust. "You will have the west wing," he said finally. "Mrs. Pemble will show you the rooms. I keep to the east side of the house, and I expect you will find that arrangement suits us both." "It suits me perfectly," Rosalind said. "Good." He set down his glass. "Then we understand each other." Not entirely. She had been waiting for the right moment all through supper, and she would not get a better one. "I have a condition of my own, Your Grace. One you were not told before the papers were signed, because it was mine to give, not my father's." His eyebrow rose, the first true sign of interest he had shown her all day. "Go on. There is a cottage at the eastern edge of your land, near the old orchard. My father mentioned it in the settlement papers as an outbuilding that comes with my dowry lands. That much was true, and she prayed it would be enough to satisfy him without further questions. I ask that no one from this house go near it after dark. Not you, not your staff, not your steward. Whatever you hear from that direction at night, whatever lights you see, I ask that you leave it be." The dining room went very quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "That is a strange request from a new bride," Weston said slowly, "on her wedding night." "It is the only request I have," Rosalind said. "I am asking you to honor it as you would honor any term of our contract. In exchange, I promise I will give you no other trouble. I will keep to my rooms, I will play my part before your guests, I will give you no cause for complaint. But that cottage, and my nights, are mine alone." Weston studied her for a long moment. She could see the suspicion working behind his eyes, turning her words over, searching for the lie in them. She held perfectly still and let him look. "You understand how this appears," he said at last. "A new wife with a secret cottage and rules about the dark. Men have been made fools for less." "I am not asking you to trust me," Rosalind said. "I am asking you to keep your word. You struck a bargain for a wife who would give you no trouble. I am giving you exactly that, on one condition. Break it, and you may find I am not so easy to live with after all." Something almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. A threat from a woman who arrived here with nothing but a trunk and a gray dress. "A promise," Rosalind corrected. "There is a difference. You taught me that yourself, not an hour ago." He was quiet for a long time after that, turning his wine glass slowly by its stem. Rosalind waited, her heart beating hard beneath her calm exterior, aware that everything now rested on the answer of a man she had known for less than a day. "Very well," Weston said finally. "I will not go near your cottage after dark. I will instruct my staff to do the same, but understand this, Lady Marchmont." He said her new title carefully, as though testing its weight. "I bought peace in this house. If I find that peace disturbed, I will not honor terms that were never fully explained to me. You have your secret. Keep it small, and keep it quiet, and we shall get along well enough." "Thank you, Your Grace." "Weston will do, when we are alone." He rose from the table, the conversation clearly finished. "Mrs. Pemble will show you to your rooms." He left her sitting alone at the long table, the candles burning low, and Rosalind allowed herself a single unsteady breath. One condition, one promise, from a stranger with cold eyes and a horse he mourned more than his marriage. It would have to be enough. Mrs. Pemble arrived a few minutes later, a stout woman with kind eyes and quick, careful movements, and led Rosalind up a wide staircase to the west wing. The rooms were larger than anything Rosalind had lived in since before her mother died, all soft lamplight and heavy curtains, and she found herself oddly unmoved by the luxury of it. She had not married for comfort. "You'll find everything you need here, my lady," Mrs. Pemble said, lighting the last of the lamps. "If there's anything wanting, you've only to ring." "Thank you, Mrs. Pemble." Rosalind hesitated, then added, "I understand His Grace has agreed that the eastern cottage, on the dowry land, is to remain undisturbed after dark. I would consider it a great kindness if the staff understood the same." Mrs. Pemble's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened with quiet attention. "As you say, my lady, the staff keep to the house of an evening in any case. There's little reason for anyone to wander that far." "Good." Rosalind managed a small smile. "Then I think we shall get along very well." When the housekeeper had gone and the door was closed, Rosalind sat on the edge of the wide, unfamiliar bed and allowed herself, finally, to think of Winnie. Her sister would be waiting even now, alone in the cottage with only a single candle, and the promise that Rosalind had made months ago, the night their father first came to her with Lord Crane's offer. "Whatever it costs," Rosalind had said, "whatever I must do, I will keep you safe and keep you hidden until you are strong enough to be seen." She had not known, then, that the cost would be a duke's cold eyes across a dinner table and a stranger's promise that could break as easily as it was made. Outside her window, the last light was fading over the orchard, and somewhere beyond it, in a cottage she was forbidden to speak of, and forbidden, by her own design, to let anyone see, her sister was waiting for the dark. Rosalind rose from the bed, changed quickly out of her wedding dress, and reached for the plain traveling cloak she had hidden at the bottom of her trunk. The house was quiet. The Duke had kept to his side, as promised. She had perhaps 2 hours before anyone thought to look for her, and she intended to use every one of them. She slipped out through the side door Mrs. Pemble had shown her, into the cool dark of her wedding night, and did not look back at the great house behind her. Ahead, past the orchard, a single small light was already burning in a cottage window, waiting for her the way it had waited every night for months. She had made a bargain with a duke to protect that light. She did not yet know what it would cost either of them before the truth came out, but as she walked faster through the trees, her only thought was of the sister who needed her, and the promise she meant to keep no matter what stood in her way. Behind her, unseen in the darkened window of the east wing, Weston Kestrel stood with a glass of wine going warm in his hand, watching a small figure in a gray cloak vanish into the trees exactly as she had promised she would, and wondering, despite himself, what kind of woman he had actually married. The pattern began on the second night, and by the end of the first week, the entire household had noticed it. Every evening, once the last candles in the great hall were snuffed and the servants retired to their quarters, the new Duchess of Marchmont disappeared. She left through the side door near the kitchen garden, always wrapped in the same plain gray cloak, and did not return until the small hours of the morning. She spoke to no one about where she went. She offered no explanations. And true to his word, Weston did not follow her, though it cost him more than he expected to simply stand at his window each night and watch her vanish into the dark. The staff, of course, had opinions. "It isn't natural," muttered one of the younger maids to another, as they folded linens in the laundry room. "A new bride, off into the woods every night like a ghost. What decent woman has business out there after dark?" "Hush," said the older woman beside her, though she did not sound entirely convinced by her own caution. "It's not our place to wonder." But wonder they did, and the wondering traveled, as it always does in a large house, until it reached the ears of Mr. Aldridge, the Duke's steward, a lean and careful man who had served the Marchmont family for over 20 years, and considered it his personal duty to protect the estate from scandal of any kind. "Your Grace." Aldridge found Weston in his study a week after the wedding, going over accounts by lamplight, though it was well past midnight. "I do not wish to speak out of turn, but the staff are talking." "They are always talking, Aldridge. It is what staff do." Weston did not look up from his ledger, though his pen had gone still on the page. "About the Duchess," Aldridge said carefully. "Her evenings away from the house. I understand you gave your word not to inquire, but a man in your position cannot afford whispers of impropriety, particularly this early in a marriage that already raised eyebrows across the county." Weston set down his pen. The candlelight caught the hard line of his jaw. "What are they saying precisely?" "Some say she meets a lover from her old life, someone her father could not buy her free of, even with your coin," Aldridge said, choosing his words with visible reluctance. "Others say something stranger still, that she visits a place of ill repute in secret, or worse, that she practices something the church would not smile upon. I do not credit any of it, Your Grace, but I thought you should know what is being said beneath your own roof." Something cold and unfamiliar settled in Weston's chest, a feeling he recognized from years ago and had hoped never to feel again. He had been made a fool once before, by a woman he trusted with his whole unguarded heart, and the scars from that lesson had shaped every choice he had made since, including the cold, transactional marriage he believed he had arranged with Rosalind Hartley. He had told himself he wanted nothing from this match but peace and an heir in due course. He had told himself her secrets were her own business, so long as they did not touch his name. But a name was precisely what was now at stake. "I gave my word," Weston said slowly, "and I intend to keep it. But I will not have my house become a source of gossip for every parlor in the county. Watch her, Aldridge, if you must. Discreetly. I want to know if she meets anyone, if anyone comes or goes from that cottage besides herself. I will not break my promise not to go there myself, nor will I have you disturb her directly. But I will know what is happening on my own land." Aldridge bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Grace." That night, for the first time since the wedding, Weston found himself unable to remain at his window and simply watch. He paced his study instead, pouring one glass of wine and leaving it untouched, thinking of his prize stallion, sold away to settle another man's debts, and of the strange, composed woman who had walked into his life in its place. He had grieved the horse more openly than he cared to admit even to himself. It had been a gift from his late father, the last living connection to a man Weston had loved and lost too young, and giving it up had felt like severing one more thread to a past that already held too little of comfort. He had told himself the trade was simply practical. Crane wanted the Stallion badly enough to forgive the Hartley debt entirely, and Weston had needed a wife of suitable birth without the tedious business of courtship, which he no longer had any patience for after his last experience of it. Rosalind Hartley, sensible and composed, had seemed an acceptable answer to a problem he wished settled quickly and without complication. He had not expected complication to walk through his door on her very first night. 2 days later, restless and unable to keep himself entirely away, Weston rode out at dusk under the pretense of checking the eastern fence line, a task any of his men could easily have handled. He told himself it was reasonable estate business. He told himself he had no intention of going near the cottage itself. He told himself several things, in fact all of which fell away the moment he crested the low hill above the orchard and saw, through the bare branches of the trees, a single candle burning steady in a cottage window. He reined in his horse and sat very still, watching. There was no sound from the cottage, no voices, no movement he could make out from this distance. Just the small, warm glow of a single candle, burning in the dark like something being carefully protected. He thought of what Aldrich had said, of lovers and secrets and things the church would not smile upon, and found, to his own surprise, that none of it seemed to fit the quiet, careful woman who had faced him across the dinner table with such steady composure. Whatever waited in that cottage, he did not believe it was scandal of the kind the servants imagined, But belief was not proof, and proof was what he needed if he meant to protect his name. He was still watching when a shape moved briefly across the candlelit window, small and slight, and then was gone. A moment later, the candle itself was extinguished, and the cottage went dark. Weston sat on his horse in the cold evening air for a long while afterward, turning the sight over in his mind, before finally turning back toward the house. He did not tell Rosalind what he had seen. He was not entirely certain, himself, what he had seen at all. Rosalind, for her part, spent those same evenings in a routine she had refined over many months of practice, long before her marriage had ever entered the arrangement. She slipped through the orchard with a covered basket, food taken quietly from the kitchen with Mrs. Pimble's unspoken cooperation, medicine bought with the last of her own small savings before the wedding, and a fresh candle to replace the one that would burn down before morning. Inside the cottage, her sister Winnie waited each night, thinner than she liked to see her, but alive, and that was the only thing that mattered. "You look tired," Winnie said one evening, her voice thin but steady as Rosalind unpacked the basket by candlelight. "Is the Duke cruel to you?" "He is not cruel," Rosalind said, and found, to her own surprise, that it was true. "He is cold and proud, and he does not trust easily. But he has kept his word so far, and that is more than many men would manage. You gave up so much for me." Winnie's eyes, too large in her thin face, filled with the particular guilt she carried every time Rosalind visited. A marriage to a stranger, a duke who bought you like cattle at market. "I gave up nothing I was not willing to give," Rosalind said firmly, taking her sister's cold hand in both of her own. "You are my sister. I would trade 100 marriages to keep you safe, and I would do it again tomorrow without a second thought. Now eat something before the broth goes cold, and let me hear how you have been feeling. Has the cough eased at all since the new tincture?" They spoke in low voices long into the night, the way they always had, sisters bound by grief and by secrecy since their mother's death had left Winnie's fragile health entirely in Rosalind's keeping, and their father too consumed by debt and desperation to properly tend to either daughter. It was Rosalind who had found the physician willing to treat Winnie quietly, away from prying eyes that might call her illness something worse than it was, something that could ruin whatever small prospects the family had left. It was Rosalind who had insisted on the cottage, isolated and easily overlooked, when their father's creditors began circling too close to the main house. And it was Rosalind who had, in the end, offered herself in marriage to a stranger with cold eyes and a prize stallion, simply to buy her sister a little more time, a little more safety, and the medicine that kept her breathing steady through the worst of the winter nights. She did not regret it. She would not allow herself to. But walking back through the orchard well past midnight, her empty basket swinging at her side, Rosalind could not shake the growing unease that had settled over her since the wedding. She had seen Aldridge watching the tree line from the stable yard 2 evenings running, his manner too careful to be accidental. She had noticed the way the younger maids fell silent when she entered a room, their eyes sliding away with the particular guilt of people who had been gossiping. And once, just once, she was almost certain she had heard the sound of a horse on the low hill above the orchard, though when she looked, there had been nothing there but bare branches and the darkening sky. Whatever peace she had hoped to build in this marriage, it was already beginning to fray at the edges, thread by careful thread, and Rosalind knew with growing certainty that she could not keep her secret hidden forever. The only question that remained was how much time she had left before it came apart entirely, and what it would cost her, and Winnie, when it finally did. Lord Silas Crane arrived at Marchmont unannounced on a gray afternoon 3 weeks into the marriage, his carriage rolling up the long drive with the confident ease of a man who believed himself welcome everywhere he chose to go. Weston received him in the study, more out of old courtesy between neighboring estates than any real warmth between them. Crane had always struck him as a man too pleased with his own cleverness, the sort who counted every favor owed to him and never forgot to collect. It was Crane, after all, who had first proposed the trade of Stallion for bride, framing it to Weston as a mutually convenient arrangement, a way for the Duke to acquire a suitable wife without the tedium of a season, while quietly settling Edgar Hartley's crushing debts in a manner that spared the family public disgrace. At the time, Weston had told himself the arrangement was practical and clean. Looking now at Crane's satisfied smile as he settled into the chair across the desk, Weston felt the first real prickle of doubt about how clean it had actually been. "Marchmont," Crane accepted the offered brandy with an easy nod. "You look well. Married life must agree with you." "It agrees well enough." Weston did not offer further comment. "And your Duchess?" Crane's eyes glittered with something Weston could not quite place, curiosity or amusement or perhaps both at once. I confess I have heard interesting things from the county about your new wife's habits. Evenings spent away from the house, a cottage on the eastern edge of your land that no one is permitted to approach after dark. Quite the mystery you've married into, old friend. I am not aware that my household affairs are common conversation for the county, Weston said, his voice carefully even, though something tightened behind his ribs at hearing his private uncertainty spoken aloud by another man's mouth. Come now, Marchmont. You know how these things travel. Crane swirled his brandy, seemingly delighted by the effect his words were having. I only mention it because I confess a certain fondness for the Hartley family, having done business with Edgar for some years now. I would hate to see any further trouble come to them, or to you, through some unfortunate misunderstanding. Is there something specific you came to say, Crane, or did you simply ride out to enjoy my brandy and speculate about my marriage? Crane laughed, a short, sharp sound. Direct as ever. Very well, I will be plain. Edgar Hartley's debts to me were settled by our arrangement. The Stallion, in exchange for his daughter's hand, and your generosity in absorbing what remained. But I have recently learned that Edgar owes a separate sum to another party entirely, one I hold a personal interest in seeing resolved. I wonder if your new Duchess might have mentioned it. She has mentioned nothing of the kind. No. Crane's smile did not waver, but something calculating moved behind his eyes. I did not think she would. Rosalind Hartley was always a careful girl, kept her family's business close, even as a child. I remember her mother was much the same. Before she passed, there was a younger sister too, if memory serves. Sickly thing. I wonder whatever became of her. The question hung in the air between them, deliberately casual, and Weston felt the shape of something important slide just barely out of his reach. He kept his expression neutral through long practice, though his mind was already working, turning over every strange detail of the past 3 weeks. The candlelight in the cottage window, Rosalind's fierce insistence on her single condition, the basket she carried each evening that Aldridge had confirmed was always full going out and empty coming back. I was not aware there was a younger sister, Weston said carefully. Ah. Crane's eyes brightened with satisfaction, as though he had confirmed something he already suspected. Perhaps I misspoke. It has been some years since I concerned myself with the particulars of the Hartley household. You must forgive an old family friend his faulty memory. He rose, setting down his glass. In any case, I only came to offer my congratulations properly, and to remind you that should any further difficulty arise regarding Edgar Hartley's affairs, I remain a resource you may call upon. We are neighbors, after all, and I should hate for any misunderstanding to sour what has been, until now, a most convenient arrangement for us both. After Crane's carriage had rolled back down the drive, Weston remained in his study for a long time, staring at nothing, turning the conversation over piece by piece. A younger sister, sickly, unmentioned, a cottage forbidden after dark, a basket carried each evening, full and then empty. The pieces arranged themselves into a shape he did not entirely trust, because trusting it meant admitting that his suspicion of Rosalind's fidelity had been not just unfounded but unkind, and Weston Kestrel was not a man accustomed to admitting he had been wrong. He thought, unwillingly, of Vivian. It had been 4 years since his engagement to Vivian Ashford had ended in the worst possible way, with her secret arrangement to marry a wealthier man discovered only days before Weston's own wedding to her was to take place, and the humiliation of that betrayal had followed him through every season since, hardening into the careful, transactional approach to marriage that had led him, eventually, to a stable yard and a trade of horse for bride. He had told himself he wanted nothing more from Rosalind Hartley than peace and duty. He had not expected to find himself 3 weeks into the marriage, lying awake at night wondering what truth she was protecting behind her composed gray eyes, and wanting, despite every hard lesson of his past, to know it. That evening, Rosalind noticed the change in him immediately. He was quieter at dinner than usual, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle beneath her collar. She had grown accustomed to his cool distance over the past weeks, a distance she had, if she was honest with herself, come almost to appreciate for the space it gave her. This new attention felt different, sharper, and far more dangerous to the careful arrangement she had built to protect Winnie. "You had a visitor today," she said, when the silence between them grew too heavy to bear. "Lord Crane." Weston watched her face as he said the name, searching for some flicker of reaction. She gave him nothing, though her pulse quickened beneath her calm exterior. "He sends his regards to the Hartley family. He mentioned your father's business dealings, and a younger sister, though he claimed not to remember her clearly." The room went very still. Rosalind kept her hands steady around her wineglass through sheer force of will, though every instinct screamed at her to flee the table entirely. Lord Crane has always had a talent for remembering exactly what suits him, and forgetting exactly what does not, she said carefully. I would not put much stock in anything he chooses to share. That may be, Weston said, but I find myself curious nonetheless. Is there a sister, Rosalind? The use of her given name, without title, without distance, caught her off guard. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression she had not seen from him before, something that might almost have been concern beneath the careful composure. For one dangerous moment, she considered telling him everything. The words rose in her throat, the whole truth of Winnie's illness, the cottage, the desperate arrangement that had led her here to this table, married to a man she barely knew, all in exchange for a little more time and a little more safety for the only family she had left. But she thought of Crane's visit, of his too casual mention of Winnie, of the way he had clearly been testing Weston's knowledge and finding it wanting, and fear closed her throat before the words could escape. If Crane knew about Winnie, if he suspected how desperately Rosalind needed her sister's condition kept quiet and hidden, he would use it. Men like Crane always found a way to use what others needed most. I have asked you not to pry into my private affairs, she said instead, her voice quieter than she intended. I have kept every other promise of this marriage. I have asked for one thing in return. I would ask that you honor it a little longer, Weston, whatever Lord Crane has chosen to hint at over your brandy this afternoon. Something in his expression closed again, the brief warmth retreating behind the same cold composure he had worn on their wedding day. As you wish, my lady. He rose from the table, his chair scraping loud against the floor in the quiet room. Though I will say this, a man does not enjoy being made a fool in his own house, whatever bargain he struck to fill it with a wife. He left her alone at the table, and Rosalind sat very still in the flickering candlelight, her heart pounding with a fear that had nothing to do with Crane's veiled threats and everything to do with the look on Weston's face before he had turned away. She had married a stranger to protect her sister. She had not expected, in doing so, to feel the particular sting of disappointing a man whose good opinion she had never intended to want. Later that night, walking the familiar path through the orchard with her basket heavy on her arm, Rosalind found her thoughts circling back again and again to the dinner table, to Weston's careful question, and her own refusal to answer it. She thought of her mother, dead 6 years now, and of the last thing she had said before the fever took her, her thin hand gripping Rosalind's with surprising strength. Take care of your sister. Whatever it costs you, whatever you must give up, promise me you will keep her safe. Rosalind had promised, and she had kept that promise through every hardship since, through their father's mounting debts and his increasingly desperate schemes to settle them, through Winnie's worsening illness and the physicians who charged more than the family could afford, through the humiliation of being traded like property in a stable yard for a stranger's prize horse. She would keep it now too, whatever it cost her marriage, whatever suspicion it raised in a proud duke's cold gray eyes. But as she reached the cottage and saw Winnie's thin, pale face waiting in the candlelight, coughing harder than she had the night before, Rosalind felt the first true crack of fear that her careful arrangement might not hold much longer, no matter how fiercely she tried to protect it. You look troubled, Winnie said, her voice rough from coughing, more than usual. It is nothing, Rosalind said, forcing a smile as she unpacked the basket. Only a difficult evening. Eat something, and let me see how your breathing has been. Has the new medicine helped at all? But even as she busied herself with her sister's care, Rosalind's mind remained back at the dinner table, on the wounded look in Weston Kestrel's eyes, and the growing certainty that whatever fragile peace she had built between them would not survive many more visits from Lord Silas Crane. Weston told himself, as he had told himself every night for the past week, that he would not follow her. He had made a promise. Whatever else could be said of him, whatever cold reputation he had earned in the years since Vivian's betrayal, Weston Kestrel kept his word. He had told Rosalind he would not go near the cottage after dark, and he had meant it when he said it. But Crane's visit had changed something in him. A slow, corrosive doubt that grew a little larger each night he stood at his window and watched his wife disappear into the trees with her covered basket, and her unreadable expression. He poured himself a glass of wine he did not drink and told himself, again, that he would not follow her. Then he found himself outside, walking the same path he had ridden along at dusk weeks before, his boots silent on the soft ground, the cold night air sharp in his lungs. He told himself he was only walking the eastern fence line, the same excuse he had used before, though there was no fence to check at this hour, and both of them would know it if he were seen. He did not intend to reach the cottage itself. He told himself that firmly, with every step. He only wanted to see from a safe distance whether Crane's insinuations held any truth to them, whether some other man waited in that cottage for his wife, some old attachment from her life before their marriage that she had not been able, or willing, to give up. He was perhaps 200 yards from the tree line when a figure stepped out of the shadows to intercept him, and Weston nearly startled at the sight of Mrs. Pemble standing directly in his path, her hands folded before her, her expression carefully composed in a way that immediately raised his suspicion further. "Your Grace." She did not sound surprised to see him, which told him a great deal in itself. "It's a cold night for a walk." "I am checking the fence line," Weston said, aware even as he spoke how thin the excuse sounded. "Of course, sir." Mrs. Pemble did not move from her spot on the path. "Though I should mention, the fence was mended just this week. Nothing out that way needs your attention tonight." Weston studied the older woman carefully, noting the way her eyes kept flickering ever so slightly toward the cottage light barely visible through the trees behind her. "You know something, Mrs. Pemble? About the cottage, about my wife's evenings." For a moment, something shifted in the housekeeper's careful composure, a flicker of conflict that told Weston he had guessed correctly. "It is not my place, sir, to speak on matters that belong to her ladyship." "It is very much your place, when those matters concern my household and my name," Weston said, more sharply than he intended. "I have kept my word for 3 weeks now, Mrs. Pemble, honored a condition I do not fully understand, while every servant in this house whispers about my wife behind closed doors, and Lord Crane rides out to remind me of it over brandy in my own study. I am asking you plainly, what is in that cottage?" Mrs. Pemble was quiet for a long moment, her loyalty visibly warring with something else, perhaps sympathy for the frustration written plain across her employer's face. "It is not my secret to give, Your Grace," she said finally, "but I will say this much, because I believe you are a better man than your pride sometimes lets you show. Whatever her ladyship is protecting in that cottage, it is not the kind of secret that shames a marriage. I have known this family a long time. I would stake my position here on that being the truth." It was not enough, and both of them knew it, but something in the housekeeper's steady certainty settled some of the turbulent doubt in Weston's chest. He looked past her once more toward the small, steady light in the cottage window, and found he did not have the heart to push past her toward it, not after she had spoken with such quiet conviction on his wife's behalf. "Very well," he said finally. "I will not go further tonight, but I will not wait forever either, Mrs. Pemble. A man cannot live indefinitely with a wife who trusts him with nothing at all." He turned and walked back toward the house, and did not see the relief that crossed the housekeeper's face as she watched him go, nor the way she lingered a moment longer on the path, as though considering whether she had said too much or too little. Rosalind found out about the encounter the very next morning, when Mrs. Pemble came to her rooms under the pretense of discussing the household linens and instead relayed, in a low and careful voice, exactly what had passed between herself and the Duke the night before. "He came very close, my lady," Mrs. Pemble said, "closer than any night before. I do not think he will be turned aside so easily again." Rosalind sat very still at her dressing table, her reflection pale in the morning light. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemble. You have done more for me than I had any right to ask. I have known you since you were a girl in your mother's kitchen, my lady, sneaking sweets when you thought no one was looking." The housekeeper's expression softened. "I am glad to help however I can. But I will say this, and I hope you will forgive an old woman's honesty. The Duke is not a cruel man, whatever cold face he shows the world. I have served this house long enough to know the difference. If you told him the truth, I do not believe he would use it against you." "I cannot risk it," Rosalind said quietly. "Not yet. Lord Crane already suspects something. If the Duke knows the full truth and it reaches Crane through some careless word, some servant's gossip, some slip at the wrong moment, Winnie will not be safe. I have built this secret too carefully to unravel it now, however much it costs me with my husband." But the cost was mounting faster than she had anticipated, and she felt it plainly that evening at dinner, in the careful distance Weston maintained between them, the questions he no longer asked, the silence that had replaced whatever fragile understanding had begun to grow between them over the past weeks. She missed, unexpectedly, the brief warmth she had glimpsed in him the night he had used her given name instead of her title. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself her only duty was to Winnie, and everything else was a luxury she could not afford. "You look tired, my lady," Weston said, breaking the silence between them with unexpected gentleness. "Your evenings are taking their toll, I think." "I manage well enough," Rosalind said. "Do you?" He set down his fork, studying her with an intensity she found difficult to meet. "I followed you last night, Rosalind. Or I tried to. Mrs. Pemble stopped me before I reached the cottage, and I honored her request to turn back, though it cost me more restraint than I care to admit. I am telling you this because I do not wish to deceive you, even as I begin to suspect you are deceiving me." Her breath caught, fear and something else, something almost like relief that he had told her the truth instead of hiding it, tangling together in her chest. "You broke your word." "I came close to breaking it," he corrected. "I did not, in the end. But I will not pretend the temptation is not growing stronger every night, Rosalind. I married you believing our arrangement would be simple, peace and duty, and nothing more demanded of either of us. Instead, I find myself lying awake wondering what my own wife is hiding in a cottage on my own land, and growing angrier by the day at my own uncertainty. I have given you no reason to distrust my fidelity," Rosalind said, her voice tight with the effort of holding back everything she wanted to say. "Whatever Lord Crane has implied, whatever the servants whisper, I have kept every promise of this marriage except the one thing I asked to keep for myself. That should count for something, Weston." "It does," he said, and something in his voice had gone rough, almost raw. "It counts for a great deal, in fact, which is precisely the trouble. I find I do not want simply peace from this marriage anymore, Rosalind. I find myself wanting to understand my own wife, and it is a wanting I did not expect, and do not entirely know what to do with." The confession hung between them, unexpected and unguarded, in a way neither of them had intended, and for a long moment neither spoke, the air charged with something neither cold arrangement nor simple duty could explain. Rosalind felt her carefully built composure waver dangerously, felt the pull of honesty rise in her throat once more, stronger this time than it had been with Crane's visit still fresh in her mind. But she thought of Winnie, thin and coughing in the cottage, and of Crane's calculating eyes across the study, and she forced the words back down. "I am sorry, Weston," she said quietly. "I cannot give you what you are asking for, not yet. Please believe that it is not because I do not value your trust. It is because I am protecting something more fragile than either of us can afford to risk." Weston studied her for a long moment, the raw honesty in his expression slowly retreating behind familiar composure, though something in his eyes had softened, however slightly, from the cold suspicion of weeks before. "Then I will wait," he said finally. "Not because I am satisfied, Rosalind, but because I begin to believe Mrs. Pemble was right about one thing at least. Whatever you are protecting, I do not think it is the kind of secret that should end a marriage. I only hope, for both our sakes, that you tell me the truth before Lord Crane finds a way to twist it into something far more dangerous than the truth itself." It was, Rosalind realized as she watched him leave the table, the closest thing to trust he had offered her since their wedding day, and it terrified her nearly as much as it moved her, because she knew, with growing certainty, that trust so carefully extended could just as easily be withdrawn the moment the truth finally came to light. The knock came just past midnight, loud and frantic against Weston's study door, and he was on his feet before Aldridge had even finished bursting into the room. "Your Grace, forgive the hour, but her ladyship needs you." Aldridge's face was pale in the lamplight, his usual careful composure entirely abandoned. "She came to the kitchen door not 5 minutes ago, half out of her mind with worry. She is asking for a physician, and for you, urgently. I believe something has happened at the cottage." Weston did not wait to hear more. He was moving before Aldridge finished speaking, through the darkened halls and out into the cold night air, following the steward toward the kitchen entrance where Rosalind stood waiting, her gray cloak thrown hastily over her nightgown, her composure entirely shattered for the first time since he had known her. "Weston," his name broke on her lips, raw with fear he had never heard from her before. "I need your help, please. I would not ask, I would never break my word to you, but she cannot breathe properly, and I do not know what else to do." "Who cannot breathe, Rosalind?" But even as he asked, understanding was already dawning, the pieces of the past weeks finally falling into place. "Tell me, all of it, right now, my sister." The words came out in a rush, months of careful secrecy collapsing all at once under the weight of genuine terror. "Winnie. She is in the cottage, has been since before our marriage. She has been ill for years, a weakness in her lungs that grows worse in cold weather, and our father could not afford proper care for her alongside his debts. I hid her there to keep her safe from Lord Crane's men, who threatened to seize everything we owned if father's debts went unpaid, including whatever they could take from a sick girl unable to defend herself. I married you to buy us time, Weston, to keep her hidden and cared for until she was strong enough to be seen without fear of what Crane might do to leverage her illness against us, and now her breathing has gone wrong, worse than I have ever seen it, and I do not know what to do, and I need a physician, and I need you, please, before it is too late." Whatever cold suspicion had lingered in Weston through the past weeks fell away entirely in that moment, replaced by something fierce and immediate that surprised even himself with its intensity. "Aldridge, send a rider for Dr. Bellamy immediately. Tell him it is a matter of life and urgency. Have the carriage brought round to the eastern path, and have Mrs. Pemble prepare the blue guest room on the ground floor, with a fire built high and every blanket the house can spare." Aldridge was already moving, shouting orders down the hall, and Weston turned back to Rosalind, taking her cold, shaking hands in his own without hesitation. "Show me where she is. Now, Rosalind, we have wasted enough time on secrets." They ran together through the orchard, the path Rosalind had walked alone so many nights now shared for the first time, and Weston felt something shift permanently in his chest at the sight of the small cottage ahead, the single candle burning in the window exactly as he had glimpsed it weeks before. Only this time he understood at last what it had always meant. Inside, a young woman lay on a narrow bed, thin and pale in the candlelight, her breath coming in short, labored gasps that tore at Rosalind's composure the moment she saw her. Winnie's eyes were half open, fever-bright and frightened, and she reached weakly for her sister's hand as Rosalind knelt beside the bed. "I am here," Rosalind said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay calm. "I am here, Winnie, and help is coming, I promise you." Weston knelt on the other side of the narrow bed, taking in the girl's condition with the practical urgency of a man used to managing crises on his estate, and found himself moved beyond expectation by the sight of her, so young and fragile, fighting for every breath in a cottage that had clearly been furnished with love and desperate care despite its poverty. "The physician will be here soon," he said, his voice gentler than Rosalind had ever heard it. "Until then, we need to keep her upright, and warm, but not too warm. Rosalind, help me raise her against the pillows. It will ease the strain on her chest." Together they worked, Weston's steady competence a stark contrast to the fear Rosalind had carried alone for so many months. And by the time Dr. Bellamy's carriage finally arrived, wheels crunching hard on the frozen ground outside, Winnie's breathing had eased slightly, enough that some of the wild panic had drained from Rosalind's face. The physician worked quickly and efficiently, and within the hour, Winnie was settled in the carriage, wrapped in every blanket Mrs. Pemble had been able to gather, and moved carefully to the blue guest room on the ground floor of Marchmont House itself, where a fire already blazed high and warm against the cold night. It was nearly dawn before Dr. Bellamy finally emerged from the guest room, his expression cautiously reassuring. "The crisis has passed, for tonight at least," he said. "Her lungs are weak, and have been for some time, from what I can gather. She will need proper care, warmth, good food, and rest, none of which I imagine she has had consistently living alone in that cottage. With the right treatment, however, I believe she can improve a great deal. She is young, and there is more strength in her than her appearance suggests." Rosalind's knees nearly gave out with relief, and it was Weston's steady hand at her elbow that kept her upright. "Thank you, doctor. Whatever is needed, whatever it costs, I want it provided." After the physician had gone, promising to return the following day, Rosalind found herself alone with Weston in the quiet hallway outside the guest room, exhaustion and relief warring with a fear that had not entirely faded, the fear of what came next, of how thoroughly her secret had finally unraveled. "I am sorry," she said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "I should have told you from the beginning. I was afraid, Weston. Afraid Crane would find a way to use her illness against us if he knew. Afraid you would see her as a burden you had not agreed to take on. Afraid of 100 things that seem foolish now, standing here after everything you just did to help her." "You were protecting your sister," Weston said. "I cannot fault you for that, whatever secrecy it required. If anything, I understand it better than you might expect." He was quiet a moment, something old and painful moving behind his eyes. "I lost my own father young, and my mother not long after. I know what it is to feel responsible for holding together the pieces of a family with too little help and too much fear of what might happen if the wrong person learned your weaknesses. I only wish you had trusted me sooner, Rosalind. Not because I am owed your trust as your husband, but because I would have helped you carry this burden weeks ago, had I known." Something in Rosalind's chest, some tightly held fear she had carried since the night of her wedding, finally began to loosen at his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "For tonight, for everything. I do not know how to properly express what it means, after so many months of carrying this alone." "You do not need to," Weston said. "Winnie will stay here, properly cared for as long as she needs. That is not a question I intend to revisit. But Rosalind, I must ask you something, and I need you to be entirely honest with me now that the worst of the secrecy is behind us. Does Lord Crane know the truth of your sister's condition? His visit, his careful questions, they concern me more now than they did before." Rosalind's brief relief curdled instantly back into fear. I do not know how much he suspects. He mentioned her that day in your study, though he claimed not to remember clearly. If he learns the full truth, that she has been hidden away all this time, weak and vulnerable, I fear what he might do with that knowledge. Our father still owes him money beyond what your marriage settled, Weston. I never told you that either. There is more debt, tied to circumstances I do not fully understand myself, and Crane has always struck me as a man who collects every advantage he can find. Weston's expression hardened, the softness of moments before replaced by something colder and more determined. Then we will need to move quickly, before he finds a way to use any of this against your family, or mine. Get some rest, Rosalind. Sit with your sister if it eases your mind, but rest when you can. Tomorrow, I intend to learn exactly what hold Lord Crane still believes he has over the Hartley family, and I intend to end it permanently. He left her standing in the quiet hallway, watching him go with a strange new ache in her chest that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the unexpected, unguarded warmth of a man she had married as a stranger, and was only now beginning to truly know. Whatever trouble still waited with Lord Crane, whatever danger remained to be faced, Rosalind found, for the first time since her wedding day, that she did not feel entirely alone in facing it. Weston rode to Crane's estate the following afternoon without warning, choosing the same discourtesy Crane himself had shown weeks before, and found the man in his study surrounded by ledgers, an expression of mild surprise crossing his face at the unannounced visit. Marchmont, this is unexpected. Crane rose, gesturing toward a chair Weston did not take. I trust nothing is wrong. Quite the opposite, Weston said. I have come to settle a matter that should have been settled clearly from the beginning. I understand Edgar Hartley owes you a debt beyond the one resolved by my marriage to his daughter. I am here to learn the full amount, and to pay it in full, today, in exchange for a complete and final release of any further claim you believe you hold over the Hartley family. Something flickered behind Crane's easy smile, calculation shifting quickly beneath the surface. That is a generous offer, though I confess I am curious what has prompted such urgency. I am also aware, Weston continued, ignoring the question, that you have taken a particular interest in my wife's younger sister, a girl you claimed not to remember clearly during your visit to my house, despite mentioning her with remarkable specificity. I would like to understand why a man with no stated interest in a sickly, hidden girl has gone to such trouble to hint at her existence to her sister's husband. Crane's smile finally slipped, just slightly, replaced by something more guarded. You misunderstand my intentions, Marchmont. I merely thought it my duty as a family friend to ensure no misunderstanding arose between you and your new bride. I think, Weston said, his voice going hard and cold in a way that made even the confident Crane shift uncomfortably in his chair, that you saw an opportunity to destabilize my marriage in the hopes of gaining some further leverage over the Hartley family, and by extension over me. I think you have made a habit of collecting debts not for the coin itself, but for the power it gives you over desperate men and their families. I think Edgar Hartley's remaining debt to you was never about money at all, but about keeping a hold over a sick girl's safety, knowing full well that her family would pay almost any price to protect her from exposure. The silence that followed confirmed more than any words could have. Crane's carefully maintained composure cracked, just slightly, revealing something colder and more calculating beneath. Even if that were true, Crane said slowly, you would find it difficult to prove, and difficult still to explain to the county why a duke concerns himself so deeply with the private debts of a fallen family he married into for a horse. Perhaps, Weston agreed, but I find I no longer care how it appears to the county, Crane. I care that you have spent weeks trying to frighten a sick girl's sister into silence, and that you have done so while smiling across my own dinner table and drinking my own brandy. I am prepared to pay whatever remains of Edgar Hartley's debt today, in full, with witnesses present to confirm the transaction and its terms. I am also prepared to make it known, quietly but thoroughly, throughout every circle that matters to a man in your position, exactly how you have chosen to conduct your business with families too desperate to refuse your terms. You may decide which outcome you prefer. Crane studied him for a long, tense moment, the calculation behind his eyes working visibly now, weighing threat against advantage in the way Weston suspected he had weighed every decision of his careful, predatory life. Finally, something in his posture deflated, the confident charm replaced by grudging practicality. The remaining debt is £400, Crane said. Settle it today, and I will provide written release of any further claim on the Hartley family, sister included. Have the papers drawn immediately, Weston said. I will not leave this house until the matter is fully and formally closed. 3 hours later, Weston rode back toward Marchmont with the signed release papers secured in his coat, the last thread of Crane's leverage over the Hartley family finally and permanently severed. It had cost him a significant sum, more than he had expected, but he found he did not regret a single pound of it, not when he thought of Rosalind's fear the night before, nor of the thin, fragile girl now resting in his own guest room, finally safe from a threat she had never known how close it had come. He arrived home to find Rosalind sitting at Winnie's bedside, reading quietly aloud from a worn book of poetry, while her sister dozed peacefully against a mountain of pillows, her breathing steadier than it had been in the cottage, her color already improving after a single day of proper warmth and care. Rosalind looked up as he entered, and something in her face, relief mixed with an emotion far warmer than relief alone, made his chest tighten in a way he was only beginning to grow accustomed to. "It is done," he said quietly, drawing her out into the hallway so as not to wake the resting girl. "Crane's remaining claim on your family has been settled, in full, with witness papers confirming there is nothing further he can hold over you or Winnie. He will not trouble your family again." Rosalind stared at him, momentarily speechless, before the full weight of relief finally broke through her careful composure entirely. "You paid it. Whatever it was, you simply paid it, without a moment's hesitation." "I would have paid a great deal more," Weston said simply. "Rosalind, I have spent the past weeks suspicious and cold toward a woman who was quietly carrying a burden most men would have crumbled beneath, and doing so with a strength and devotion I have rarely witnessed in anyone, let alone in a wife I married as a stranger for the sake of convenience. I owe you an apology, not gratitude for my help. I should have trusted you from the beginning, secrets and all. You had no reason to trust a stranger with a mysterious cottage, and no explanation," Rosalind said softly. "I gave you every reason to doubt me, Weston, and you still chose, in the end, to help without hesitation the moment I truly needed you. I do not think that requires an apology at all." They stood together in the quiet hallway, the distance that had defined their marriage since its cold, transactional beginning, finally dissolved into something neither of them had expected to find in a bargain struck over a prize stallion and a family's desperate debt. Weston reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. "I did not marry you expecting to want anything more than peace," he admitted quietly. "I find, now, that I want a great deal more than that. I find I want to know everything about you, Rosalind, not merely the secrets you were forced to keep, but the woman who kept them so fiercely, at such cost to herself. And I did not marry you expecting to find a man capable of such quiet kindness beneath all that cold pride," Rosalind said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her exhaustion. "I find I want the same thing you do, Weston. I have wanted it, I think, since the night you told Mrs. Pemble you would honor my one condition, though you had no reason to trust me at all." The weeks that followed brought a transformation neither of them could have predicted on their strange wedding day. Winnie's health improved steadily under proper care, color returning to her cheeks, strength returning to her thin frame, until the sisters could be found most afternoons walking slowly together through the Marchmont gardens, laughing over old memories in a way Rosalind had feared she might never hear again. Weston, for his part, found himself drawn increasingly into their company, teaching Winnie to play chess in the long evening hours, listening with genuine interest to Rosalind's stories of their childhood before grief and debt had reshaped their family so cruelly. The county predictably buzzed with fresh gossip once word spread of Lord Crane's sudden and complete withdrawal from any further dealings with the Hartley family, and of the quiet, decisive manner in which the Duke of Marchmont had settled the matter. Some whispered admiration for a man willing to spend so freely in defense of his wife's family. Others simply noted, with the particular satisfaction gossips reserve for a story concluded happily, that the cold Duke of Marchmont, once famously burned by a broken engagement years before, seemed entirely, unmistakably in love with the strange bride he had purchased with a prize stallion. Rosalind heard the whispers eventually, carried to her through Mrs. Pemble's careful reports of household gossip, and found she did not mind them nearly as much as she once might have. She thought often, in quiet moments, of the wedding night, when she had faced a cold stranger across a dinner table and asked for a single condition, expecting nothing beyond his grudging agreement to a stranger's odd request. She had not expected, in asking him to trust her with the dark, that she would find in him a partner willing to fight for her family with the same fierce devotion she had carried alone for so many months. One evening, months after the crisis that had finally brought them together, Weston found her in the garden at dusk, watching the last light fade over the orchard where she had once walked alone every night with her covered basket and her carefully guarded secret. He came to stand beside her, taking her hand in his without hesitation, the easy intimacy between them now so natural neither of them remarked upon it any longer. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The cottage, the secrecy." "Never," Rosalind said immediately. "I do not miss carrying that fear alone, not for a single moment, but I think I will always be grateful for what it taught me, about what I am capable of protecting, and about the man I did not expect to find capable of protecting it alongside me." She turned to face him fully, the last light catching the warmth in her eyes. "You gave up your prize stallion for a bride you believed would give you no trouble at all, Weston. I hope you do not regret the trade too badly, given how much trouble I turned out to be." Weston laughed, a genuine sound she had come to treasure in the months since Crane's defeat, and drew her closer against the cooling evening air. "I regret nothing," he said. "I would trade every horse in my stables 100 times over for exactly the trouble you have brought into my life, Rosalind Kestrel. I only wish I had understood sooner what a poor bargain I believed I was making, when in truth it was the very best decision I ever made." Behind them, in the warm light of the house, Winnie's laughter carried faintly through an open window, strong and unburdened in a way it had not been in years, and Rosalind found, standing in the quiet garden with her husband's hand warm in hers, that the promise she had made her dying mother so long ago had finally, fully, been kept. A year to the day after the stable-yard trade that had begun it all, Marchmont House looked nothing like the cold, quiet estate Rosalind had first entered, as a stranger clutching a single trunk and a desperate secret. The gardens, once merely a place for her nightly path toward the orchard and the hidden cottage beyond, now bloomed properly under the care Rosalind had finally allowed herself the freedom to give them. Winnie, fully recovered and stronger than she had been in years, spent her mornings there among the roses, her laughter a constant welcome sound throughout the house that had once felt so silent and forbidding to her sister. Edgar Hartley visited occasionally, humbled by all that had passed and grateful beyond words for the daughters he had so nearly failed, though Rosalind noticed, with quiet satisfaction, that Weston never entirely lost his careful watchfulness whenever her father raised the subject of business or debt. Some lessons, it seemed, left their mark permanently, and Rosalind found she did not mind her husband's protectiveness in the slightest. The prize stallion, as it turned out, had not entirely vanished from their lives either. Word reached Marchmont late in the spring that Crane, eager to rid himself of any lingering connection to the scandal that had cost him so dearly in the county's estimation, wished to sell the horse to whoever would take it off his hands quickly and quietly. Weston did not hesitate for even a moment. "I do not need him back for pride's sake," he told Rosalind. The evening the stallion was finally led back into the Marchmont stables, sleek and proud as ever, seemingly none the worse for his time away. "I find I have gained a great deal more from our bargain than I ever expected to lose. But he was my father's gift to me, and I find I am glad to have him home again, all the same." Rosalind watched her husband run a gentle hand along the stallion's neck, the great horse nickering softly in recognition, and felt her heart swell with a warmth she still, even after a year of marriage, found faintly astonishing in its depth. She thought of the frightened, furious young woman who had stood in this very stable yard 12 months before, bracing herself for a cold and loveless arrangement with a stranger, and marveled quietly at how completely her life had transformed since. That evening, as the household settled into the comfortable rhythms of a family finally whole and at peace, Weston found Rosalind in the small sitting room that had become, over the past year, their favorite place to end each day together. He carried with him a small wrapped parcel, which he placed gently in her hands without explanation, watching her expression with the quiet anticipation she had come to recognize as genuine affection. However rarely he still allowed himself to show it so openly. Inside she found a miniature portrait, carefully painted, of the three of them together in the garden, Winnie laughing between them, Weston's hand resting protectively at Rosalind's waist, all three faces bright with a happiness none of them could have imagined on the cold day the stallion had first been traded away. "I commissioned it last month," Weston said, "though I confess I was not entirely certain how to give it to you without sounding sentimental, which you know is not naturally my strength." "It is perfect," Rosalind said, her voice thick with emotion as she traced the painted figures with gentle fingers. "Thank you, Weston, for all of it, for the horse you gave up and the one you brought home again, for trusting me, in the end, more than I ever gave you reason to, for loving Winnie as though she were your own family from the very first night you helped save her life." "She is my family," Weston said simply, "as you are. I did not understand, that first cold evening in the stable yard, what I was truly gaining in our bargain. I understand it now, every single day, and I do not believe I will ever stop being grateful for it." Outside, the last light of evening settled gently over the orchard where Rosalind had once walked alone through so many frightened, secretive nights. The the cottage beyond now standing empty and forgotten, its purpose long since fulfilled. She thought, sometimes, of that lonely path, of the fear and determination that had carried her along it night after night, and found she could look back on it now not with pain, but with a quiet, steady pride in the sister she had saved, and the love she had found, entirely unexpected, in the bargain that had once seemed like nothing more than a stranger's cold transaction. The Duke had bought a bride with a prize stallion, believing he was securing nothing more than peace and duty. He had found, instead, a family worth every sacrifice, a wife whose quiet strength matched his own pride and doubled it, and a love neither of them had dared to hope for on that first uncertain night. And as the candlelight glowed warm through the windows of Marchmont House, no longer a signal of secrets kept in darkness but simply the comfortable light of a family settling in for the evening together, Rosalind Kestrel knew, with complete and steady certainty, that she had found exactly where she belonged.